I watched my father slide a check for $300,000 across the mahogany dining table to my brother for a business that didn't exist. When I asked for a loan co-signature for my biotech startup 20 minutes later, my mother told me I needed to learn financial independence. If you want to understand the Jenkins family dynamic, you only need to look at our childhood bedrooms in our upscale Chicago suburb. My brother Liam had the master suite over the garage, complete with a skylight, a custom sound system, and a revolving door of expensive hobbies that our parents fully funded. Guitars he played twice, professional photography equipment that gathered dust, a massive hydroponic setup for a botany phase that lasted exactly 3 weeks. My room was at the end of the hall. It was perfectly fine, but it was the room of someone who was expected to simply exist, achieve, and not cause a fuss. Liam was 27, 3 years my senior, and he possessed a kind of weaponized charisma. He was tall, with my mother's striking cheekbones and my father's booming, persuasive laugh. He had dropped out of 2 different universities, once because the curriculum was stifling his creative process, and the second time to travel through Europe to find his center. My parents, Arthur and Diane, called him a free spirit. They called his lack of direction a marination period for greatness. I, on the other hand, was the workhorse. I graduated summa cum laude from Boston University with a dual degree in biomedical engineering and computer science. While Liam was posting photos from a yacht in Mykonos, I was pulling triple shifts as a lab assistant, desperately trying to save money for my master plan, a predictive AI software designed to detect early-stage pancreatic cancer markers. The project wasn't just academic, it was deeply personal. My grandmother, Arthur's mother, had died of the disease when I was a teenager. The turning point of my entire life happened on a frigid Thanksgiving weekend. I had flown home from Boston, bringing a 40-page binder filled with market research, letters of intent from 2 mid-sized research hospitals, and a rock-solid business plan. I needed $75,000 for server space, legal patents, and to buy myself 6 months of living expenses so I could code and pitch full-time. I wasn't even going to ask them for a handout. I just needed my father to co-sign a business loan because my student debt made my credit-to-income ratio unappealing to the banks. Dinner was a lavish affair. Diane had hired a private chef, and the dining room smelled of roasted duck and expensive Pinot Noir. As the plates were being cleared, Liam stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his wine glass. "Family," Liam announced, flashing that $1 million smile. "I finally figured it out. I've found my legacy." He pulled out his iPad and passed it to my father. On the screen was a sleek, minimalist logo. Oak and Ember, artisanal distillery and tasting room. "I'm moving to Austin, Texas," Liam declared, pacing the room. "The craft liquor market is exploding. I'm going to distill premium, small-batch bourbon. It's an experience, Dad. A lifestyle brand. Think leather couches, exposed brick, VIP tasting memberships." I waited for the inevitable questions. "Do you know how to distill liquor? Have you secured a commercial lease? What are the zoning laws in Austin? What are your projected margins?" Instead, my father leaned back in his chair, his eyes shining with pride. "A distillery. Now that's a legacy, Liam. That's a gentleman's business." "It requires capital to do it right, though," Liam said, suddenly looking boyish and vulnerable. "The equipment, the raw materials, the marketing. I need an angel investor who believes in the vision." My mother squeezed his hand. "We believe in you, darling. Always." Right there, between the cheese course and dessert, my father pulled out his checkbook. He didn't ask for a spreadsheet. He didn't ask for a timeline. He wrote a check for $300,000 and slid it across the mahogany table. "Make us proud, son." I sat there, my heart pounding against my ribs, gripping my 40-page binder under the table. I felt a surge of nausea, but also a desperate, foolish spark of hope. If they were willing to hand Liam $300,000 for a concept built entirely on buzzwords, surely they would co-sign a $75,000 loan for a thoroughly researched medical tech company. When the excitement settled, I cleared my throat. I pulled my binder from my lap and set it on the table. "Actually, I have some business news of my own," I said, my voice remarkably steady. I walked them through the AI model. I showed them the preliminary data, the endorsements from my professors, the gap in the diagnostic market. I laid out the loan terms, explicitly stating that I would be responsible for the payments, and that their names would only be on the paper as a guarantee. Silence fell over the room. My mother, Diane, looked at the binder as if it were a dead insect I'd placed on her pristine tablecloth. Arthur sighed, taking off his reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Chloe, this all sounds very complicated and very risky. Software, AI, it's a crowded market. It's less risky than a first-time distillery with no master distiller on staff," I pointed out, unable to stop the defensive edge in my tone. Diane frowned, her maternal warmth instantly vanishing into an icy glare. "Chloe, don't be jealous of your brother. This is his moment." "I'm not jealous," I pleaded. "I'm asking for a fraction of the support, just a signature. Not even your cash." "It's not about the money," my father said, adopting his best corporate lecture voice. "It's about the principle. Liam has struggled to find his path. He needs a head start to build his confidence. You, Chloe, have always been naturally gifted. You've always been independent. If we co-sign this loan, we'd be robbing you of the character-building experience of bootstrapping your own success." I stared at him. "You're giving him $300,000 to build character, but making me beg the bank for $75,000 is going to build mine?" "Don't speak to your father with that tone," my mother snapped. "We have provided for you your entire life. We paid for your undergraduate degree. Now that you're an adult, you need to learn financial independence. We won't enable you by acting as a safety net. You need to earn this." I looked at Liam. He was examining the edges of his $300,000 check, actively avoiding my gaze. He didn't say a word to defend me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. The absolute finality in my parents' eyes killed something deep inside me right then and there. I quietly closed my binder, stood up, and went upstairs to pack my bags. I booked a red-eye flight back to Boston for that same night. As I walked out the front door, dragging my suitcase through the snow, my mother called out from the porch, "You're being dramatic, Chloe. You'll thank us for this tough love one day." I didn't look back. The next 18 months were the darkest, most agonizing period of my life. I cut my parents and Liam off almost entirely. I didn't formally announce a estrangement. I just stopped calling, stopped visiting, and let my text responses dwindle to one-word answers. They hardly seemed to notice my absence, too busy planning trips to Austin to check on the Empire. I moved out of my decent apartment into a windowless, mold-smelling basement studio in Somerville to save money. I worked a soul-crushing night shift, doing medical data entry for a local hospital, staring at screens from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. By day, I lived on cheap instant coffee and adrenaline, coding my software and cold emailing every venture capitalist and angel investor within a 200-mile radius. The rejections were brutal. Too young, too theoretical. Come back when you have FDA approval, which, ironically, I couldn't get without the funding. I lost £15. I had dark purple bags under my eyes that no concealer could hide. I was running entirely on spite and a desperate need to prove my parents wrong. During my rare moments of downtime, I would masochistically check Liam's Instagram. He had moved to Austin, all right, but there were no pictures of copper stills, fermentation tanks, or construction sites. Instead, his feed was a highlight reel of a trust fund playboy, pictures of him in VIP booths at clubs on 6th Street, a video of a brand new Porsche 911 Carrera with the caption, CEO Perks, Oak and Ember Hustle, trips to Tulum, Mexico, ostensibly to scout agave for a potential tequila offshoot, which just looked like him drinking margaritas on a yacht with aspiring influencers. My blood boiled every time I looked at it, but I used the anger as fuel. My breakthrough finally came through sheer, stubborn attrition. I managed to corner Dr. Harrison Caldwell at a medical tech symposium in Cambridge. Harrison was a notoriously ruthless angel investor, a former thoracic surgeon who had made $500 million selling a proprietary surgical robot. He was known for making grown men cry during pitch meetings. I waited by his car in the parking garage. When he approached, I blocked his door and delivered my elevator pitch in exactly 45 seconds. He looked at me, taking in my cheap suit and my exhausted, hollowed-out face. "You look like you're going to pass out, kid," he grunted. "I will pass out after you look at my clinical trial projections." I shot back, handing him my flash drive. "Page 12, the false positive reduction rate. Just look at it." He took the drive. 2 days later, his assistant called me in. The meeting was a 3-hour interrogation. Harrison shredded my business model, challenged my coding architecture, and pushed every button he could find. But I knew my product inside and out. I fought back, defending my data with the ferocity of someone who had nothing left to lose. At the end of the meeting, Harrison leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said, "You're arrogant, defensive, and running on fumes. But the tech is brilliant. I'll give you $1.5 million for 25% equity. But you quit the data entry job today, and you answer only to me." I walked out of his office, sat on a bench in the Boston Common, and wept until I couldn't breathe. I had done it. I had built my own net. 6 months after securing the funding, my company, Aegis Diagnostics, had moved into a proper lab space. We were hiring. We were hitting our developmental milestones ahead of schedule. I was finally breathing again. But while my star was rising, the smoke screen over in Austin was beginning to clear. The first crack in the facade came from my cousin, Bethany. We grabbed coffee when she visited Boston for a conference. She looked uncomfortable as she stirred her latte. "Have you spoken to your parents recently, Chloe?" she asked carefully. "Not really, just polite birthday texts. Why?" Bethany sighed. "My dad, your Uncle Richard, was down in Austin for a golf tournament last week. He called Liam, wanting to see the distillery. Liam made up some excuse about the site being a hazard zone due to plumbing issues. So, Dad just drove by the address Liam had been bragging about." I leaned in. "And?" "It's an empty lot, Chloe," Bethany whispered. "There's no building. There's no construction crew. Nothing. Dad did some digging in the county public records. Liam never bought the land. He never even applied for a commercial zoning permit." A cold shock washed over me, followed immediately by a twisted, dark sense of vindication. "Then where is the $300,000? "That's the thing," Bethany said, her eyes wide. "We think he put a chunk of it into some obscure cryptocurrency that completely tanked. The rest, well, you've seen his Instagram. Porsches and penthouses aren't cheap." I went back to my lab that day, feeling completely numb. I had imagined my parents eventually finding out my software was a massive success and feeling a twinge of regret. But I hadn't anticipated Liam's house of cards collapsing so spectacularly. 2 weeks later, at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, my phone lit up. The caller ID said Arthur Jenkins. My father hadn't called me directly in nearly 2 years. I let it ring until the last possible second before answering. Hello? Chloe? My father's voice cracked. He sounded 10 years older, the booming confidence entirely stripped away. Chloe, please. Are you there? I'm here, Dad. What's wrong? It's Liam, he choked out. And in the background, I could hear my mother, Diane, sobbing hysterically. Chloe, we are in terrible trouble. He's lost everything, and he took out loans. Terrible loans, Chloe, from people you do not mess with. We need your help. The silence on the phone was suffocating. I stood in my sterile, brightly lit laboratory, the hum of the servers a stark contrast to the chaotic gasping of my mother on the other end of the line. What kind of loans, Dad? I asked, keeping my voice deliberately flat. I was a CEO now. I dealt with crises daily, but the trembling in Arthur Jenkins's voice was something I had never encountered. Private capital, my father whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. A firm out of Miami called Vanguard Horizon Finance. They specialize in high-risk, short-term liquidity. Liam told them he was bridging a gap before a major liquor distribution deal went through. So he defaulted, I said, rubbing my temples. He owes them money. What does this have to do with me? He didn't just borrow money, Chloe, Arthur choked out, the final vestiges of his pride crumbling. He borrowed $800,000, and to secure the loan, he used our home, the Chicago house. He put it up as collateral. I froze. You let him use your primary residence as collateral for a shell company? We didn't let him do anything, Diane shrieked into the receiver, having snatched the phone from my father. Her voice was shrill, laced with terror and indignation. He forged our signatures, Chloe. He found a corrupt notary in Texas, mocked up the deeds and signed our names. Vanguard Horizon just served us with foreclosure papers. If we don't pay them $850,000 with the penalties, by the end of the month, we lose the house. We lose everything. The sheer audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. Liam hadn't just failed. He had actively, maliciously defrauded our parents to fund a counterfeit lifestyle of Porsches and VIP bottle service. I'm calling the police, I said instantly. Liam committed felony wire fraud and forgery. You need a defense attorney, Mom. You need to file a police report against your son immediately to stop the foreclosure. No, Diane screamed. Are you insane? They'll send him to federal prison. He wouldn't survive a week in prison, Chloe. He's sensitive. He made a mistake because he was under so much pressure to succeed. Even now, even with the bank coming to take the roof over their heads, he was their victim. He was a fragile artist who just made a little mistake with a pen and nearly $1 million. Then what do you want from me? I asked, though a cold dread was already pooling in my stomach. I knew what was coming. My father took the phone back. He cleared his throat, trying to summon the authoritative, patriarchal tone he used to use on me. It didn't work. It just sounded pathetic. Chloe, we saw the article. The feature in TechCrunch about Aegis Diagnostics. It says you secured $1.5 million in seed funding. It says your valuation is already soaring. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. Do not finish that sentence, Dad. Chloe, listen to me, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Family is family. We are in a desperate situation. We just need to borrow $850,000, just to clear Vanguard Horizon. You can write it off as a corporate loan. We'll pay you back. I'll come out of retirement. I'll consult. Are you out of your mind? I shouted, the dam finally breaking. That is investor capital. That is Harrison Caldwell's money, meant for FDA approval, clinical trials, and server architecture. I have a fiduciary duty. If I divert a single cent of that money to pay off a loan shark for my criminal brother, I will be arrested for embezzlement. You're the CEO, Diane yelled in the background. You can authorize a diversion of funds. You're just being vindictive. You've always hated him. I don't hate him, Mom. I just refuse to go to prison for him. I took a deep, shuddering breath, staring out the window at the Boston skyline. You have two choices. You report Liam to the authorities and save your house, or you protect Liam and you lose the house. But you are not touching my company. You are not dragging my life's work down into the gutter to cover for his felonies. We paid for your college, my father roared, desperation turning into venom. We put clothes on your back. We fed you. You owe us, Chloe. I asked you for a signature, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. A signature for $75,000. You told me I needed to learn financial independence. You told me you wouldn't be a safety net. Well, Dad, consider the lesson learned. I am entirely independent, and you have no safety net. I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. For a week, I lived in a state of hypervigilance. I hired a personal security guard for the Aegis lab, terrified that Liam might show up in person, desperate and cornered. But Liam didn't show up. My parents did. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when the receptionist buzzed my office. Chloe, there's an older couple here. They say they're your parents, and they have a lawyer with them. I felt the blood drain from my face. I immediately dialed Harrison Caldwell. Over the past year, Harrison had become less of an investor and more of a mentor. He answered on the second ring. I quickly explained the situation. Keep them in the lobby, Harrison growled, his voice vibrating with predatory excitement. Do not say a word to them. I'm 3 blocks away and I'm bringing Gregory. Gregory Finch was Harrison's attack dog corporate litigator, a man who billed thousands an hour to make people disappear legally. 10 minutes later, I walked into the glass-walled conference room in the lobby. Arthur and Diane looked terrible. They had aged a decade. My father's suit hung loosely on his frame, and my mother's immaculate blonde hair was visibly graying at the roots. Sitting next to them was a sweaty, cheap-looking attorney with a briefcase that looked like it had been bought at a thrift store. Harrison and Gregory walked in right behind me. Harrison didn't even sit down. He just leaned against the glass, glaring at my parents. Chloe, my mother sobbed, reaching across the table. I took a step back. The sweaty lawyer cleared his throat. Ms. Jenkins, my name is Robert Vance. I represent your parents. We are here to negotiate a settlement before we file a formal suit in civil court. Gregory Finch laughed. It was a dry, terrifying sound. A suit for what, exactly? Emotional distress because her brother is a fraudster? No, Vance said, puffing out his chest. A suit for equity. Arthur and Diane Jenkins provided the foundational capital for Chloe's intellectual property. They housed her, fed her, and fully funded the undergraduate education that directly led to the development of the Aegis AI algorithm. Under the principle of unjust enrichment and implied sweat equity, we are claiming a 20% stake in Aegis Diagnostics, which we will liquidate to cover the Vanguard Horizon debt. For a moment, the room was so quiet you could hear the rain hitting the glass. I was too stunned to speak. They were actually trying to steal my company. They were trying to cannibalize the one thing I had built from the dirt, just to save the son who had robbed them blind. Harrison Caldwell pushed off the glass wall. He walked over to the table and slammed both hands down, making my mother jump. "Let me explain how the real world works, Bob," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, menacing baritone. "Aegis Diagnostics is a Delaware C Corp. Its intellectual property was developed entirely post-graduation on proprietary servers, funded by my capital. If you file this frivolous, laughably incompetent lawsuit, I will not just countersue you. I will bury you. I will file sanctions against you with the state bar for malicious litigation. I will tie Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins up in so much discovery and legal debt that they won't even be able to afford the cardboard box they'll be living in when Vanguard takes their house." Harrison leaned closer to my father, his eyes dead and cold. "You gave a con artist $300,000 to buy Porsches, and you told the genius standing next to me to bootstrap it. You made a bad investment, Arthur. In business, when you make an investment that bad, you go bankrupt. Now get out of my building before I have you trespassed." My father looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "Chloe, please. He's your brother. If Vanguard doesn't get their money, they're going to go to the police. Liam will go to prison." I looked at the man who had raised me, the man who had slid a fortune across a mahogany table to a liar while watching me beg. "Then Liam should get a good public defender," I said. I turned my back on them and walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. It was the exact same thing my mother had done to me on that porch in the snow. Only this time, I wasn't being dramatic. I was being final. The fallout was rapid, brutal, and entirely public. 2 weeks later, Vanguard Horizon lost their patience and reported the fraudulent collateral documents to the FBI. Liam was arrested at an airport in Atlanta, trying to board a one-way flight to Costa Rica with a duffel bag containing $40,000 in stolen cash. The trial was a media circus. My brother, the golden boy, the artisanal visionary, was exposed as nothing more than a desperate grifter. He pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of aggravated identity theft. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Because Liam had forged the documents, Vanguard couldn't legally foreclose on the house. However, the legal fees my parents incurred trying to defend Liam, combined with the absolute collapse of their social standing in Chicago, ruined them anyway. They had to sell the house at a massive loss to pay off the lawyers. They moved into a cramped, 2-bedroom rented duplex in a less than desirable suburb. I didn't attend Liam's sentencing. I was too busy. That same month, Aegis Diagnostics received breakthrough device designation from the FDA. Our clinical trials proved that our AI could detect pancreatic cancer markers 18 months earlier than traditional screening methods. The news sent shockwaves through the medical community. 6 months after Liam went to prison, Harrison and I sold Aegis Diagnostics to a major multinational healthcare conglomerate. The buyout was for $120 million. I bought a penthouse overlooking the Boston Harbor. I paid off my student loans. I bought a beach house in Maine. But the very first thing I did with my new wealth was establish the Evelyn Jenkins Memorial Foundation, named after my grandmother. The foundation provides full-ride scholarships to underprivileged female students pursuing degrees in biomedical engineering. I haven't spoken to my parents since the day they tried to sue me in that glass conference room. They send me letters sometimes, usually around the holidays, or when Liam's commissary account runs low. I don't read them. I just feed them into the paper shredder in my home office, watching the words disappear into ribbons. My parents gambled their legacy on a son who sold them smoke while punishing the daughter who built fire from scratch. Today, my cancer detection software operates in 50 hospitals, saving lives in my grandmother's memory. Liam is serving 5 years for federal wire fraud, and my parents live in a rented duplex. They chose their investment. I simply let them reap the dividends.